Hey everyone, and welcome to something a little bit different with our Xbox Series X coverage. So new titles are coming online, and it's a range of titles from AAA heavy hitters like Gears 5 to more smaller independent projects like the two games we're going to be covering here, specifically the Falconeer, which is shaping up to be something rather special, and a title we've already looked at on Switch and Xbox One, the Touryst. So I've been capturing these games on Xbox Series X, shared my footage with John Linneman here, and we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. It was nice to finally check these out and see them in action. And, you know, when looking at these types of indie games, you really got to keep in mind that these are not designed to push any boundaries. This is not like pure next generation, but they're beautiful in their own right. And it was really cool to see them in action. So should we start with the Falconeer?
Yeah, so I first saw this game, I think it was an XO19. I met the developer, Thomas Sala, and I was just struck by this game because the performance is flawless, it looks beautiful, it's got a very individual aesthetic because, well, there are no texture maps in the whole game. So it's very different to anything I think I've seen on the system before. I really hope this game does well because it's shaping up to be really, really special. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, that is interesting. No texture maps. It's a unique look, and that even applies to things like the UI, which is rendered without textures. It's all like weird geometric shapes and things like that to give you the impression of text, and it's a unique look, and I really appreciate it. It's almost like an evolution of the kind of like shading you would have seen like in something like Another World, for instance, back in the day. But obviously applied to a very different game. And from what I can tell, at least based on your footage, it looks to me very reminiscent of something like a Star Wars Rogue Squadron style game.
Yeah.
With a hint of one of my favorite PS2 games, Skygunner. So you have these large open maps to fly around. You've got targets, you've got land, you've got sea. And you're sort of on the back of this large winged creature as you fly through the sky.
Yeah, I mean, interesting to see how they're pushing the new hardware here. Well, we've actually been speaking to the developer about this, or more specifically you have, so we actually know how this title specifically scales across all of the different Xbox platforms, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting idea. So obviously this is a multi-platform game. It is designed for Xbox One base to run at 60 frames per second, all the way up to Series X. So obviously on Series X, the primary mode is just a native 4K rendering resolution. And by the way, the game does use Unity as its engine. So it's quite an impressive feat to see another high frame rate Unity game on consoles. But it's also been mentioned that he was implementing a 4K 120 mode, but apparently that is not quite ready yet. The option's there in the menu, but it doesn't actually do anything. It just turns off VSync temporarily, but it sounds like that's coming in a patch since this is kind of a preview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the other machines then, so Xbox One X is actually 1800p, so you can see it's not that far off really, and I think that there's a lot of headroom still on Series X. And then of course Xbox One S is full 1080p, and then the base Xbox One, so what he said was interesting, is that the 3D environment is rendered internally at 1080p, but the game outputs like 900p. It's a very strange thing, but apparently he opted for this to shave off a few little areas where the performance was dipping under 60.
That's interesting.
Which, you know, I can appreciate that.
So I think so hold on a second. This is Xbox One S is at 1080p. And then Xbox One, the original set-top box, is 900p. Is that right?
That's what he's saying. And I should note, we can't test this because I actually tried to play the game on these systems, and it seems like it's only currently available for preview on Series X. It doesn't even start on the base system, so I have to take his word for it for now.
That's interesting. I think if it is rendering at 1080p, I'm kind of curious as to why there's a 900p output. But I guess the bottom line is Xbox One S is 1080p. That's fine. I guess the one that we don't know at the moment is Series S.
Yes, that's right. Don't have any information on that one yet.
But I've got to say, I mean, I've really enjoyed playing this. It really does look fantastic. Very individual artistic style. And yeah, can't wait to play more on this. We've got preview code at the moment. Review is en route. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
And I guess it's worth noting that even in this pre-launch state, the frame rate is rock solid. And that was clearly a design objective for him. And yeah, it delivers. I mean, again, it doesn't look like it's pushing any insane technical boundaries, but this is a one-man game and with a really cool-looking art style. And yeah, it does run at a rock-solid 60 frames per second. So good on them for that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've got more to say about the Falconeer when the time is right, but I think we just wanted to get it out there in the here and now, remind people about the title. It's looking really, really impressive. So let's move on to another title, another game, one which you're intimately familiar because you've covered it on several systems, and that is the Touryst.
That's right. Yes, I'm a huge fan of Shinen's work. They've done some amazing stuff in the past, mostly on Nintendo systems, and that's where the Touryst started. But they recently did an Xbox/PC port and went ahead and updated the game to run on Series X. And, you know, it's a fairly basic kind of update, but it just kind of shows what you can do with an already released game. So in this case, there's two modes. The default is actually, if you're outputting at 4K 60 from the console, the game actually runs internally at 6K resolution, still at 60 frames per second, which is locked to 60 frames per second. So it's very smooth, and it uses downsampling. And because of the way that they do sort of like, you know, image treatment, there's no like real anti-aliasing in effect in any way. It ends up just looking like super ultra sharp.
Right, okay, that's really interesting. It was the same on the PC, wasn't it? Where if you were running at 4K, it was actually running internally at 8K.
That's right. That's exactly right. I think that was on the PC you would turn on, they called it anti-aliasing, but it was literally just super sampling. And that's effectively the same here. The anti-aliasing that they use is just rendering at a high resolution and downsampling. So yeah, the image quality is superb. Not that it, you know, again, this is a game that was designed for the Switch, right? So it's not pushing any insane boundaries. It just shows what you can do with the extra overhead of a new console, which they also demonstrate with the optional 4K 120 mode, which continues to render the game at just a native 4K as it was on Xbox One X, but it doubles the frame rate up to 120 frames per second. And you sent over some of this footage, and I checked it out running at 120 on my OLED, and man, it, you know, I'm very excited for more 120 hertz games going forward. I hope it becomes a thing. We'll see, but it looks really good.
Yeah, I think we've got to say here that we can only output this at 1080p to our capture devices. So you are seeing 120 hertz, but our capture device can only do
that's right
1080p downscaled from 4K native. So yeah, that's something, a technical challenge we're going to have to address internally. But yeah, the Touryst, fascinating game, absolutely fantastic on Switch, migrated across beautifully to Xbox One, and now we've got the ability to play it at 6K native, downscaled to 4K, and we can play it at 4K 120 on Xbox Series X. So yeah, not a huge amount of technical innovation going on in terms of pushing the new consoles, but what we are seeing is a small developer using the extra power to deliver something we haven't seen before, which I think is great.
Yeah, I agree. But, you know, the high frame rate modes here, it really kind of makes me think again about how it's going to be when people actually get their hands on these new consoles. You know, there aren't a lot of TVs that support HDMI 2.1, which is necessary if you want 120 hertz at resolutions around 4. I guess if you want 4K 120, you need a 2.1 display. Most people don't have a 2.1 display, and you know, I have an LG OLED C8 that's only a couple years old, but it cannot do 4K 120, obviously, and I feel like I'm missing out. And I think we've been hearing the companies talk about, you know, 120 hertz, and I agree, it's very cool, but it's not really sort of mentioned as much that, oh yeah, most people aren't going to be able to really use this to its fullest extent. And I think that's something to think about when you're getting these new machines, is that you're going to need if you really want to take advantage of this, you're going to need a very, very recent set, something like the LG CX, for instance.
Yeah. It is a bit of a no man's land at the moment because, as you say, your C8 will do 120 hertz from the console, but it won't do 4K. Meanwhile, Alex's Samsung, I think he's got the NU8000, he can do 1440p at 120 hertz, and I believe his Xbox One X will support that. But yeah, the only way to guarantee full 4K at 120 hertz is an HDMI 2.1 display. And I think, from my perspective, I think it's cool that Xbox do actually support those older displays. Right now, we don't know what the situation is with PlayStation 5, whether it will support, 120 hertz on older displays, or whether you're, going to be required to get a 2.1 set.
Oh, geez. I didn't even think of that. Hopefully. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, historically, they have been kind of wedded to the specific standards. So, yeah, very definitely going to be interested to see how they handle that one. But I think it's just really cool that in the here and now, we've got two titles here that are going to be pushing the display standards of HDMI 2.1, which are opened up by the HDMI 2.1 controllers within Xbox Series X. And, interesting stuff.
And I think that's kind of an area that indie games especially can kind of dominate because, on these new machines, I do it, admittedly, I find it difficult to imagine we're going to be seeing many 4K 120 games.
Yeah.
And games that are really pushing visuals, like the real next-gen stuff. Like, I mean, obviously reconstruction techniques are amazing, and I think that's what we're going to have to see, but getting to 120 hertz is really difficult, and I don't know. We'll see how often it is supported. Hopefully it continues on throughout the gen. I would actually like to see 60 FPS become the new 30, so to speak, where the default frame rate is 60, and there's a 120 hertz becomes like 60, where game's targeted. But maybe that's wishful thinking. I guess we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, of course, is when you look at Dirt 5, for instance, it can't do 120 hertz at 4K, so you are getting, I think Tom measured something like a dynamic 1440p, which would be fine for Alex's Samsung display, but obviously I think you would want to have a proper HDMI 2.1 set for full 120 hertz at 4K.
And yeah, and that's actually a game that kind of gets into what I'm saying is like, Dirt 5 is still a cross-gen game, right? It's not like pushing the next generation to its limits, and it's already, doing 4K. You're not getting a 4K 120. So what will this mean for big titles going forward? That's kind of the question that remains to be seen for me, and hopefully I guess we'll find out, because you really can't judge a whole lot by the launch games. It's just,
I just think it's really cool that we're seeing any 120 hertz support at launch. So
I agree.
Good stuff.
I agree. That's great. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think we're going to round it off there. I hope you've enjoyed this look at a couple of really interesting looking indie titles for Xbox Series X. Suffice to say, we will be covering the AAA heavy hitters. We will be covering PlayStation 5. Just bear with us because it does actually require us to have consoles and games. And we're just covering what we've got available at the moment. And even so, I still think games like this very definitely deserve the coverage.
Yep, absolutely. Especially in this genre, like for the Falconeer, where we really haven't had too many games like this. I mean, the closest we've had is the absolutely stellar Ace Combat 7, which was my favorite game of last year, perhaps. I think I rated it as such. But this is more Rogue Squadron-ish, and it's a type of game that's just kind of disappeared. So I'm happy to see this being made.
Awesome. Anyway, that's all from us for now. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Ring the bell for instant notifications whenever Digital Foundry posts new content, or indeed hosts a live stream, which you've been doing a lot of recently, John.
Yes, indeed.
And of course, the DF Patreon, that's there for those that love what we do and want to support the team more directly. And of course, you'll get to see all of those next-gen games in pristine 4K quality. But that's all from us for now. Thanks for watching.